Institute here at Holy Family Catholic Church in Austin, Texas. We're preparing for our next interjurisdictional gathering of clergy here at Holy Family on May the 16th through the 18th with Father Kevin Yell of the American Catholic Church in Vancouver, Washington. Father Kevin is a playwright and director, and he's asked us to do 2 readings before he comes. The last one we studied 2 weeks ago, which is this document, Environment and Art in Catholic Worship, a 1978 document by the National Council of Catholic Bishops. And then the second work, which we'll look at this evening, is Peter Brook's book, The Empty Space, published in 1968. So that we all have a chance, we gave a copy of this to all of our clergy and volunteers extraordinaire so that they can read it at their leisure. But for those who don't have time to read it, we're going to review it this evening and record it so that those who are watching it can have a sense of what's contained in this book, The Empty Space by Peter Brook. As we get started, is someone on Facebook that we can just confirm that this recording is being made? If you could give us a thumbs up. Peter Brook wrote a book on theater called The Empty Space in 1968. It's divided into 4 chapters: the deadly theater, the holy theater, the rough theater, and the immediate theater. Why would Father Kevin have us reading a book about theater? I have a feeling there are going to be many ideas in this book on theater that apply also to what it is that we do on a weekly basis here at Holy Family and in churches throughout the world. Shall I take a look at some of the ideas? For instance, page 1 of this summary, this is the Cliff Notes version of Peter Brook's The Empty Space. The deadly theater. This is interesting. All that's needed for theater is an empty space, a bare stage. Think about it. For Mass, what do we need for Mass? Do we have to be in a certain place for Mass? Do we have to be in a place that resembles a church for Mass? No, you could celebrate church anywhere. We could go outside right now and celebrate Mass outside. Deadly theater is bad theater. Ooh, think about for a moment all the Masses that you've been to. Have you been to any deadly Masses? It fails to elevate, instruct, entertain. It's the theater we see most often. It's a whore. It takes your money and leaves you short on pleasure. Yikes, Peter. The public smells out deadly theater. I would suggest that people smell out deadly Masses too. You go to a place for Mass and you're like, yeah, I don't need to go there anymore. Deadly spectators enjoy a lack of entertainment or intensity. They elevate deadly theater. Weak actors think that they can act the way that a play was written, but the challenge is this. When you read a play, all you have are words on a piece of paper, and you're projecting everything else into those words. Actors draw inspiration then from imaginary resources like their own memories of predecessor sounds. They'll read a work like Shakespeare, and they'll imagine how it is that they should sound when they do a certain part in that play. We say, for instance, you can't say that a director can't say to an actor, play what is written, because all that playwrights like Shakespeare write are just words. And above that, they don't write, how should you say it, with what sort of pitch or pace or pauses for silence, with what rhythms, gestures, what you do with your hands. None of that is written down. So actors are creating all of this. Think of the ties to the liturgy. What do we have in the lecture, in the sacramentary, in the Roman Missal? It's just a book of words with various instructions. The words to read are in black, the instructions are in red, and then beyond that, a priest has to figure out how to act during the Mass. And act is probably a bad word in that situation, but how to comport oneself during the liturgy. The same with lector, those who proclaim the word, hospitality ministers, and others. Letter C, we say that a lover is romantic or that a king or a queen is noble, but then we make guesswork reconstructions based on hunch, imaginations, and memories mixed with what we admired in older actors. We're essentially creating what it is that lover or that queen or king, we believe, might look or sound like. Deadly theater, then, believes that you can find out and define how a play should be done. The problem, though, is that every work and every period has its own style. So it's hard for us to imagine all these years later what Shakespeare would have imagined for his play, how people should dress, what the stage would look like, etc. So we're creating in our own time our interpretation of this Shakespearean work. At Mass, what are we doing? We're creating in our own time a recreation of this liturgy that's been handed down to us for centuries. A challenge, Roman numeral number 2. The Peking opera seemed perfectly frozen in time, passed from generation to generation, kind of like the Latin Mass, right? Until the gap between it and the society around it became too great. And what do we have to do in the case of the Mass? We had to revise the Mass. How do we update the Mass? That was a big thing in the 1960s. When we set and repeat performances as well or accurately as possible, something invisible begins to die. The grand opera, for instance, never changes. It's deadly theater carried to the absurdity. Think about the Mass. There are certain things about the Mass that never change, which means that the Mass risks becoming deadly as well. Should we just pause and ask ourselves, what churches have you been to in the past that have had deadly Masses, where you go to a Mass and you're like, yeah, you leave and it doesn't nourish you. There's nothing that draws you back to that Mass. That's a deadly Mass. All things fluctuate on the invisible stock exchange of time. Things like hairstyles come and go. The way that we dress, they come and go. Makeup, emotions, gestures, gesticulations, tones of voices, all these things change. So if we're going to keep making the Mass alive today, we have to think about all sorts of elements that go into the Mass. Theater is relative. The actor and the audience are influenced by other plays, by the constant rewriting of history, by the amending of daily truth. The same with Mass, right? Our Mass is influenced by so many other things. Number 5, I thought this was interesting. I hadn't thought about this before, but drama is different from music. Musicians sit down and play the notes on instruments that don't change, and so the musician's personality is totally unimportant. Music doesn't need to be revised or reassessed, but in drama, on stage, the vehicle of drama is flesh and blood. Actors dress up and they speak language, thus entering with the spectator into a fluctuating territory of manifestation and existence. Now, I hadn't thought about some of these other aspects too, but in the same way that Deacon Elsa practices with our baile folklorico for that performance, at Mass, we really should be conscious about how much rehearsing and practicing we're doing. Did you ever get a sense that someone's getting up and doing something cold during the Mass without any practice? Mm-hmm. Hey, will you read this? Will you read this during the Mass? Oh, they get up and they read it. Mm-hmm. But it may not be the same experience as if they were well prepared or well trained and rehearsed, right? Do you hear sometimes people get up to proclaim something during the Mass and they're stumbling over words? And you think to yourself, boy, with a little bit of practice. I'm not talking about anyone in this room, of course. But right, you think to yourself, boy, with a little bit of practice, you could have nailed that. Educational psychologists say if you want to nail something, go through it 7 times. Sometimes when I'm hearing the word proclaim, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that person didn't have a chance to go through that 7 times, did they? Uh-oh. Commercial theater seldom succeeds for economic reasons. He's pointing to Broadway here, Brook is. 3 weeks of rehearsal don't allow for experimenting and artistic risks. I hadn't thought about that before. Broadway show is going to open up. How much rehearsal do they have? Peter Brook is suggesting, at least in the 1960s, it was, okay, you have this theater for 3 weeks to rehearse, but then you go live. Directors and actors must deliver or be fired. There's no time to experiment or take risks. Everyone is continually in danger on Broadway. Not so in the church, especially in places where priests just can't be fired. You follow me? And that's where we get the deadly theater. Letter A, audiences have suffered too many disappointments, and deadly theater steadily digs its own grave. Yeah, it's disappointing to go to Mass at such and such place, at St. Cunegunda Catholic Church. But I'll go, right, for whatever reasons. Every audience gets the theater it deserves. Ooh, every church gets the churchgoers it deserves. The audience in the play influence the actor's work. The audience in the place influence the actor's work. Actors fix and repeat their repertoire, which begins to slide toward the deadly. And the same could be said of deacons and priests and bishops, right? We say that the Mass over and over and over again, which could lead to this deadly slide toward deadly Masses if we're not careful, if we don't continue to bring them alive Mass after Mass. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was famous for saying, celebrate this Mass as if it were your first Mass, as if it were your last Mass, as if it were your only Mass. Right? Don't just repeat it. It's like, this is like my 10,000th Mass in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Right? But how do we continue bringing the Mass alive? Like a work of theater. I like this analogy, Roman numeral number 2. The rare actor is a master matador, dominating the audience and working it the way he pleases. Deadly acting is the heart of the crisis, and a lone actor can't reform the profession, can't change the entire profession, him or her or themselves. Once launched, this is true, letter A, once launched, actors fail to develop their talents. They reach a point where they no longer do their homework. It's like priests. We go to seminary for a few years, and we get through those first masses, and then we sort of start to cruise. And I bet if you ask any priest or deacon or bishop, they'll probably tell you the truth. So there's all this study and preparation, and we're nervous at first, but then you go to a certain place where you're sort of it becomes more natural. The challenge, though, is this slide toward deadly theater or deadly masses, where we're not putting the thought or the work into it that we once did. The same would apply to preaching as well, right? When we're young in our profession, we spend all sorts of time preaching or preparing the word, etc., to proclaim it. But then there comes a time in which we're maybe putting less work into it. Letter B, young actors discover what they can do and they master initial difficulties, but then they fail to go beyond their range and explore the difficult, and their work gets more and more similar. Yikes, after 23 years as a priest, I have to confess, probably my preaching sometimes sounds more and more similar. Few actors can thrive indefinitely without a permanent company and constant schooling, because it's that schooling and it's that company that make us better. Critics. This kind of touches a nerve in me, because as pastor of the parish, I sort of sense that I may be a little critical. So I liken myself to the critic, right? So I love what Brook says. He says, critics play an important and essential role at hounding out incompetence, or in other words, at helping us to improve, right? Critics keep us honest. Letter A, readers can skip pages or chapters of a novel, but you can't do that with a stage. A bored audience is going to be lost. And using public time is a fine art. I have always said, if you preach for 10 minutes to a crowd of 100 people, and if they go away remembering nothing, then you have just wasted 1,000 minutes of time. Think about that for a moment. If you preach for 10 minutes to 100 people, and they go away not remembering a single word, you've just wasted 1,000 minutes of our time as a group. Yikes. I take that very seriously as a priest. Right? What are people going to walk out of that room with? The critic sees far more incompetence than competence, or the way what I would reword that is that, those with a critical eye, they see things, they catch things, they hear things that perhaps others might not. And they hone in on those things. So if I inadvertently raise an eyebrow during the Mass from time to time, or stare at certain people from time to time, it's because it's seeing that beautiful, how it is that the human person is always capable of achieving more, of doing better. All of us. Which is why I'm so glad that Father Kevin is coming, because I don't get enough critical feedback myself from the parish. If I were to ask people, no, Father, you are great. But it's the feedback that helps us become better. Follow me? When someone says, oh, you mispronounced this word, or I was struck by the way that you said this or that helps us to be better at our craft.
Are we allowed to?
Please.
Okay. I was in this situation yesterday at a high school, because we had a show, and then the teacher said, oh, it was wonderful. What do you think? And then I said, what do you mean wonderful? What did you see?
Yeah.
Because I was watching skirt. I was watching that everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. And then I take pictures, and then I look at the pictures. but she doesn't know any of that. So for her, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And then she says, well, the museum was beautiful, and and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Know what I was thinking of a performance.
In management, they say if you're a manager, don't just tell people, oh, you're great, oh, this or that, but instead find specific ways. And and that's what I try to encourage here as a parish too. And instead of saying, oh, that homily was great, what can you tell that deacon or priest or whoever, about their ministry that will help them? What was it about that was great? What could be improved? Letter C, critics are tormented by the knowledge that theater's future depends on them. They are aware of their power for destruction. Oh, that was terrible. Yeah, you gotta be careful. I'm aware of that as pastor, that the words that I say or the way that I raise my eyebrow at a person could destroy that person. But it could also be a force for good. The critic and the actor share the same goal, moving toward less deadly theater. We'll go through 11 and then we'll pause for conversation. Another danger is deadly writers. We don't have to worry about this so much as a church, but Brook says it's difficult to write a play. Too few authors are inspiring or inspired. And there are products of weak individualism that are not as strong or rich as group creations by rich groups. I think of I have a friend here in town who leads the Spanish-speaking theater company. And it's fun to see them because they'll gather around a group of people and sort of like start playing off of one another with various ideas for their works, about what could be said and what could be done and how they could dress and how the stage should look and the lights, etc. And there becomes this sort of synergy that's at work, which is far better than just had one person tried to think through all those details. Letter C, so the question becomes, do we revive old plays or do we stage new inadequate plays? What do we do during the Mass? During the Mass, we stage the same play week after week after week after week, year after year, decade after decade. So we have the challenge of how do we keep it from becoming deadly theater, a deadly Mass? How do we keep it alive? Shakespeare used the same unit, a few hours of public time, which is what we have for the Mass, but crammed into it a quantity of lively material of incredible richness. Another challenge, deadly directors. I see myself as the pastor as sort of like the director of the actors here. The director is seen to be God, but is always an imposter, not knowing the territory, but guiding and learning the route as he or she or they go. Think about that for a moment. When the director comes together with the actors for the very first rehearsal, it's sort of like the director has an idea of what the director would like to see come out of all of this, but then you're working with all these other people. The deadly director repeats old formulae, old methods, old jokes, old effects. The deadly director doesn't challenge the conditioned reflexes of all involved in the theater. The deadly director would probably be the one to say, oh, that was great, rather than helping people to think about how it is that they're coming across. The essential question then for deadly theater is theater giving you what you want and expect? Because if it's not, it's probably deadly theater. And the good news, he ends on a positive note, though we depressingly sigh at deadly theater, another boring Mass, it's filled with possibility and capable of change. If only we could open our eyes and notice it. And he ends chapter 1 with the story. I don't know that it's true, which is why I didn't put it in the notes, but he says, in Mexico, the ancient people of Mexico used to lug big stones, through forests, through jungles, up mountains, and they didn't even realize that at night when they went home, they were creating toys with wheels for their kids to pull around. And then they would go to work at day hauling these stones. And they were like, oh, only when they opened their eyes and said, oh, wait a minute, why don't we use like wheels to get these stones where we're taking them? In the same way, when it comes to theater, or in our case, the Mass, we need to open our eyes to how it is that we can do what we're doing better. Let's just pause on deadly theater or deadly masses. Anyone ever been to a deadly Mass? Anyone not been to a deadly Mass?
I have.
A lot of this applies to teaching too. It really does, because I've gone and observed teachers and they're just so monotone, and no it's like, the kids are like staring, and you have to really make it enjoyable for them, it's hard to do, but after so much time, it happens, but then you get into the consistency of, I can do this, I know what to do, it's first day of school, I have everything down for that. So yeah, it applies a lot to teaching too.
It would be fascinating to take insights from different professions and see how they apply to what we do at church, at Mass, right? What can we learn from playwrights and directors and actors? What can we learn from teachers? What can we learn from this profession or that profession? It would be fascinating. Shall we talk about the Holy Theater? Most of life escapes our senses, but the Holy Theater makes visible the invisible. There's no reason for a Mass to be drab. We must use the stage to help people transcend their daily life experiences. We all hunger for missing things of life, for buffers against reality. The theater, or in our case, Mass, helps us with that. But nostalgia dupes us, both in theater and at the Mass. In theater, we long to be children again. Remember when the red curtain would rise and you'd have that surprise of what's on the other side of the curtain? The footlights would go up and there was a certain magic by that. Or in the Mass, there was a certain magic about the way that people dressed and or talked and or sang, the Latin Mass. I hear so much about the magical elements of the Latin Mass. But once we pull down the curtain and remove the footlights, new places cry for new ceremony. And yet the ceremony and all its meanings should dictate the shape of the place, which is essentially what we were hearing about in this other document, Environment and Art. What we're doing should influence the space such that maybe our churches need not look like theaters where everyone's looking at the back of the head of the person in front of them. After years of weak, watered-down, unconvincing imitations, we reject the notion of a holy stage. We forget that theater can climax in explosive celebration and applause, but also in deep silence, a recognition of appreciation for a shared experience. Silence too is good. Think of movies that you've seen. There's some movies that end where you're on a real adrenaline high, and there are other movies that end with sort of with the somber music, and where you're just sitting in the theater for a few minutes afterward, just sort of processing what you just experienced with everyone else who's just sitting there and experiencing it. We shy away from the holy, Peter Brook says. What is called holy has let us down. But actors make visible invisible ideas. They take invisible ideas and they make them visible. They're essentially taking that play, words written on a paper, and trying to make something visible out of all of this. Theater is a shared experience between the actor and the audience. Actors act for their own deep needs, but also they act for the audience. So on the one hand, they ignore the audience because I'm going to pretend like y'all aren't there. On the other hand, I need the audience. Priests, right? I don't want to be nervous in front of 200 people, but at the same time, I'm here for the 200 people. They forget, but constantly keep in mind the audience. Artaud said, theater is holy because it liberates us from the recognizable forms in which we live our daily lives. And then Brook goes on to talk about happenings. He used the word happening for a moment that jolts us. It's a moment that he says shouts, wake up. It jolts us into a new way of seeing things. Happenings are always the brainchild of someone, reflecting the inner resources of its creator. Happenings cause us to be more open or alert or awake, and our participation in a happening heightens our perception. Ideally, going to Mass would be a happening, right? We go in one person and we come out changed. Something happened at Mass. Number 11, religions assert that the invisible can be made visible under certain conditions. Holy theater offers the conditions for making the invisible visible. Number 12, theater, like church, is challenged to meet the hunger of those who seek to gather with others, to seek the invisible and allow it to animate and interpenetrate the ordinary. Think about how it is that people who come to Mass, they come with a certain hunger. Why do people come to Mass? They come for a reason. They're looking for something. Are we meeting that need? Number 13, true symbols are hard and clear, as opposed to false symbols, which are soft and vague. I love talking about symbols because, I had a professor who once said, let the symbols speak. When you use holy water, use holy water. Right? When you use a symbol that's weak, I sometimes see, where I grew up, they had a metal ball on the end of a stick that had a few holes in it. So when you sprinkle people with holy water, it's like throwing 3 drops of water at them at a time. That's not letting the symbol speak. Follow me? That would be, in Brook's estimation, a weak symbol. The relationship between the actor and the audience is similar to the relationship between a priest and a worshiper. Ooh. Not everyone is called to be an actor. He's relating all this to priests now, right? Not everyone is called to be a priest. Not everyone is called to be an actor. Not every priests and actors are regular people who take on the burdens of others and perform rituals for themselves and for those others. And theater is holy because it responds to the needs that churches can no longer fill. Yikes, that's an indictment against churches. He was writing in the 1960s, essentially saying even back then, people were leaving the church and going to other places like theater to meet whatever needs they felt were being filled at churches. Number 15, this is probably true, especially in the independent Catholic movement. Most theaters have things in common. They have small means. They require intense work. They're filled with rigorous discipline, absolute precision. Father Jamie is so demanding, he's so picky when it comes to proclaiming the word. Right? That's the absolute precision part. Mm-hmm. Almost as a condition, theaters are for an elite, often playing to small audiences in average size auditoriums. It just astounds me that in a city of, 1.2 million people, we have so few people coming to an alternate expression of Catholicism, to an inclusive expression of Catholicism, but we play to a certain elite. Grotowski believes that playing to larger audiences dilutes the work. If we were a mega church, it'd probably have a different feel. We try to capture the invisible, but we can't lose touch with common sense. If our language is too special, we lose audience belief. Sort of like the Latin Mass, right? The Latin Mass, the language was so special. Shakespeare's aim was holy and metaphysical, but he didn't stay long on the highest planes. He used ordinary language in that day. Theater is a community experience corresponding to a great shared need. Even if there were no audiences, actors would have to act because the theatrical event is the climax and center of their search, but performances without audiences lose their substance in the same way that masses without people. Why are you doing it? 1960s is when we changed from private masses, right? Father Jamie or Father Roy, Father Brett, anyone celebrating a mass in private in their bedroom. No, that's not what mass is all about. Mass is a community experience, like theater. Brook says, without an audience, a performance is a sham. I think the Second Vatican Council came to that same conclusion about the Mass. We need holy theater. Should we put the actor at a remote distance on a platform, framed, decorated, lit, painted in high shoes? Which, let's be honest, is what we tend to do in the Catholic tradition, right? We dress the deacons and the priests and the bishops up and we put them on a platform far from people, high above people. There's another example. Or do we make our actors more on the ground like the gods of Haitian voodoo who fly into and possess a human participant with whom we can talk, shake hands, argue, and go to bed? Here's the example of a Haitian voodoo. In Haitian voodoo, they have a pole and they'll beat their drums for a few hours until someone in the crowd feels possessed by a god. And then that person is like the living incarnation of that God. That God is speaking to you through that person. Do people experience God when they come to Mass? Or are the actors far removed from the people? Let's just pause. The Holy Theater, comments on the Holy Theater? I have a feeling Father Kevin, when he comes into town, he'll be going through this, various ideas of this with us. It'd be interesting to see the bridges that he builds between this work and what we do in liturgy as well. The rough theater. Have you been to any rough masses? Have you been to any more rough masses? I've been to a few rough masses myself, right? For whatever reason, things just aren't going right. Things aren't clicking during the mass, and you're thinking to yourself, "Ooh, this is rough." Theater can occur anywhere, not just in often cold halls. Same with the mass. Mass can occur anywhere. Rough theater or popular theater is close to the people and distinguished by its lack of style. Most audience members are unaware of the theatrical standards that are being broken, like all those little nitpicky things that Father Jamie points out to us, in other churches. There may not be the same focus on those sorts of things. Rough theater is often anti-authoritarian, anti-traditional, anti-pomp, anti-pretense. And dirt, filth, vulgarity, and obscenity given an edge. Rough theater is the theater of noise and applause, creating joy and delight, continually needing a new electric charge. Its batteries are replenished by new faces and ideas. The same energy that produces joy, though, is also capable of producing anger or hatred, thus leading to a more just society, which is why governments in many places censor theater, because it gets dangerous. You get a lot of people in the same room and you start giving them ideas about how they might revolt. Think of Les Miserables, right? You have a play or something about how it is that people might rise up against their government. It's a dangerous thing. In holy theater, prayer is real, and the belch or the fart or whatever it is comical. Yikes. But in rough theater, it's the other way around. Follow me? Where those other things are more real, and the prayer is portrayed as comical or holy, holy. Rough theater requires intelligent actors, not deadly slaves. Actors share illusions, appealing for belief, and sharing truths about society. I think it's one of the things about theater that Brook is trying to relate to us, how it is that we can use plays to really communicate truths about the human person and about our world. We experience the work emotionally and subjectively, while we evaluate it politically and objectively in relation to society. Coming to an end of this section, in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, which I'll be honest, I've never read, the holy and the rough coexist. Action is rooted in the dark, disgusting, stinking world of medieval Vienna and its brothels, and so its staging demands roughness and dirt. And yet the play reveals something about some truths about justice, mercy, honesty, forgiveness, virtue, virginity, sex, and death, all through that rough theater. Rough theater is manifest in Elizabethan theater, which shows the dirt of life, the wretchedness of poverty. Roughness is livelier today, and holiness is deadlier, he says. The magic lighting of footlights is no longer needed, and theater workers are no longer trusted or wanted. We must capture attention and compel belief. And I suspect the same is probably true of us in the church. In order for people to listen to us, first we have to get their attention. John Maxwell would say we have to spike their energy. I would say to those who are learning to preach, always begin with a hook, because a hook draws the people in and gets their attention. If I start by saying, in today's gospel, it's sort of like, okay, this is going to be like every other homily I heard. But if I start with a hook, whether that's a joke or a story or something to get people's attention, a song, you name it, a visual, then suddenly you have people's attention in a different way than if you just start with, in today's first reading, which is fine. I'm not critiquing that. It's just that there's something about the deadly theater, deadly mass, versus this type of theater that grabs grabs more attention. Thoughts on the holy and or rough theater before we get to the immediate theater? The immediate theater is a longer chapter, but we have 17 minutes till the hour. Really, and a lot of it is because he really is meandering in this last chapter, is my judgment. It's not like he's just focusing on immediate theater. This last chapter is sort of like all sorts of thoughts on the theater. Let's see which of them we might be able to apply to the Mass. Theater is a special place, different from everyday life, so it can easily be divorced from life. Can't the same be said of Mass? Mass is like a special place, which is why we've often thought for centuries, oh, I'm going to go to the church to experience God. Got news for you. God is in your everyday life. Much stays the same in theater. The cast stays the same. At your church, your priests and deacons probably stay the same. First night pressures and demands produce collaboration, dedication, energy, consideration of others' needs. In order to share a Mass, a liturgy, different people come together with various gifts and work on different things. Whether it's the Mass programs and the PowerPoints on who's preaching, someone's pulling together a homily, and someone's pulling together words for this or that. Prayers, those who are going to proclaim the word. The stage is a reflection of life relived within a system of values and value judgments. Under a magnifying glass, what we see at theater or at Mass is a group of people living with precise, shared standards, right? This is how we proclaim the word. This is how we welcome people. This is how we bring people up for communion. Theater is ever decaying and evolving. Same could be said of religion, it seems. It's ever decaying unless we're bringing life into it and helping it to evolve. We can learn and teach the rules and techniques of theater in a few hours, but the rest boils down to practice. Father Kevin can come and be with us for a few hours, but then after that, it's us practicing and practicing. There's an important relationship at the beginning between the director and the designer, thinking through how they're going to stage this play. Then there's an important relationship between the director and the actor as they transform the theoretical, the words on the page, into a physical experience played by a person. And then after that, there's a relationship between the actor and the audience. What I find fascinating about that is that at that point, the director just has to sit back, right? Deacon Elsa rehearses with the baile folklorico. There comes a point at which, okay, we just got to trust that it's going to go however it goes. I'm working with human beings here. It's the same with the Mass. We can work with whatever ministers in whatever way. Hey, would you read the first reading for us? I have no idea how this is going to go. But that's part of the risk that's involved in working with other people. Period is important. The church and various theaters preserve ritual performance clothes of great beauty. Think of the vestments that we wear at Mass. It's almost like theater in that sense. Brook is suggesting the church continues to have period costumes for its performances, Brook would say. Casting, this is why I say this is sort of like a scatter shot of different ideas here. Now he's talking about casting. The problems and the risks of casting, because every actor wants to play every role. Oh, why didn't they cast me in that role? To knowingly cast people is a vanity, though, because actors are evolving, so there's a certain guesswork. Okay, who in this room is best for this part or that part? Talent ebbs and flows according to circumstances. Some people can be good in some circumstances, with some audiences, and not so good with other audiences. Number 11, the first rehearsal is always the blind leading the blind, and then relationships change over the process of rehearsals. Actors open in new ways to one another and to the play. When they first come together for the first time, everyone's reading the same words on the page by Shakespeare or whomever, and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to bring this play to life as actors with the help of a director? Knowing that ultimately it's for the audience, and that will be critiqued by people like critics. Number 12, directors must discern when to push and challenge and when to wait, right? Do I say something? Do I say something every time I see something? Probably not, right? You can't dispirit people. After every time they proclaim, you can't be nitpicky and say, oh, well, you should do this and this, right? Only the deadly director comes to the first rehearsal with notes and scripts, ready to drill the actors until they conform to his or her or their notes. The living director is open to unfolding patterns, energy, personal variations, individual enthusiasm, laziness, different rhythms, unexpected possibilities. Probably an interesting thing if we were to ask Deacon Elsa what it's like when you pull together a baile folklorico thing. She has an idea of what piece they want to do, or she wants to do with them, and how they're going to dress. But apart from that, she's working with human beings. Follow me? And so then it becomes this thing of, okay, how do I work with these human beings with their varied gifts and levels of experience? Or is this as their individual enthusiasms or laziness, their different rhythms, their unexpected possibilities? Directors are always working with living actors who are talking and feeling and exploring all the time. And so the tension that's felt by directors is that we don't want to be despots, we don't want to be dictators, but we also know that we must do or say something, because we cannot not say something. We're part of the process as directors. If Deacon Elsa sees something happening in the Bible, or if I see something happening in the Mass, well, we got to say or do something. It's like the teacher in the classroom. If you see something happening, you got to say something, got to do something. It's your role. So all actors need a director, even those who don't think they do, because directors help actors to develop toward an ideal. Father Kevin is going to help us with the next point, because he's asked us all to prepare a reading, something to proclaim next week. So we'll have all sorts of readings for us to choose from, so that we can all take a reading next week and prepare to do it. But part of the point of Brook's work is to say the actor's art is more vocal than physical. So when an actor gets on stage, it's less about how I'm moving my arms. It's like a priest. Think about a priest. A priest does move his arms, or his or her or their arms, in certain ways, but there's probably a more important aspect, which is how they're praying and preaching and how they're using their voice. The actor must acutely listen to his or her or their voice. Brook says the instrument and the player are one. Think about that for a moment, because the instrument that you play, it's not a guitar or something you sit down. The instrument that you have is your own voice. So how are you using your tongue, your vocal cords? How conscious are you of what it is that you're expressing, or of the skills that you need to improve? How conscious are you of your gestures, your expressions, your conditioning? Because even what we think to be spontaneous, when Father Kevin asks us to proclaim something, we're going to be reaching in and sort of grabbing from our own memories and experiences and what we think is good. The goal of all rehearsals and exercises is to overcome deadly theater that lurks inside all of us. Ooh. Kind of like that image of the deadly theater lurking in us. We have to sort of like keep the deadly theater from expressing itself. If we have a false playing of a scene, it's going to come across as false to the audience. Exercises are important because it improves group play and the obstacles to it. Brook has certain exercises in his book to help groups work better together as actors. An actor, and this is a long quote from Brook, an actor, like any artist, is like a garden, and it is no help to pull out the weeds just once for all time. The weeds always grow. This is quite natural, and they must be cleaned away, which is natural and necessary too. What is the job of the director? To help the actor get rid of the weeds. Kind of a cool analogy. Mediocre actors are filled with terror during the first rehearsal, but then they fill the vacuum of their fears with standard practices. On opening night, their nerves are like those of a marksman who knows that they can hit the target, but is afraid to fail while their friends are watching. But creative actors, on the other hand, experience a different terror on opening night. They endlessly shed and start again. They rebuild the role each night rather than fall back on technique to carry them through. It'd be cool if we could say the same of deacons and priests. Rather than just doing the same thing every single Mass, they're recreating it every time. Celebrating it as if it were their first Mass, their last Mass, their only Mass. Last page. Actors must be sincere and detached. The audience can tell when we're not sincere, when we're not living everything through our bodies as actors. Deadly theater occurs when we photographically reproduce every detail. And probably the same could be true of Masses too, right? If I'm sort of like a robot, sort of like just reproducing every detail, there's something that comes across as lacking sincerity and all of that. The next point, I'm going to see if I and or we together can do what he's trying to suggest here. When we treat all words as equally pregnant, we come across as clumsy, stupid, and grand acting. Shall we read that sentence together, all of us, emphasizing every single word? Here we go, ready? When we treat all words as equally pregnant, we come across as clumsy, stupid, and grand acting. Just sort of like, get what was happening there? So I think what he and what Father Kevin will show us is that not all words are equally pregnant. In a sentence like that, if you were only to underline one or two or three words in that sentence, which are the most important words, which would be the words that you cue in on, that you focus on, that you help to bring to the attention of the audience? Because what we just did, even though it was exaggerated, we might hear at times in less exaggerated ways than the Mass. What is this detachment? Detachment allows us to stand back, which is why I always encourage our deacons and priests to watch themselves, the videos of themselves, preaching, presiding, serving at the altar, because detachment allows us to see ourselves and our own cliches. Like a painter, we're able to step back and look at the painting. Isn't that an important part of painting? The painter is painting, and then sort of like, oh, wait a minute, I need to step back and see what others are going to see. Letter C, a special intelligence, which is not present at the start, must be developed by actors. The role of the director now, directors help actors to see where they are messing up their own right urges and to overcome these obstacles, which involves a delicate dance between director, actor, and text. We have the director, we have the actors, we have the text that we're trying to perform. Becomes this delicate dance. How does the director help the actors to best express this text? Ideally, rehearsal should be private to allow actors to make mistakes, but they also need outside people watching because hostile faces create a good new tension. I have a feeling what will happen is next week with Father Kevin, we'll be here in a room, right? In a space in which we can make mistakes, but with other people watching it, and it creates this tension. Focus all attention on the function of the evening, or on the Mass in our case, on the narrating, the presenting, the technique, the audibility. Can people hear them? It kind of drives me crazy when people step up to the microphone and their voice is not coming through the sound system, right? They're not audible. The communicating to the audience. Talk about speed, precision, diction, what Father Kevin calls the 7 dials. Next week, we're going to learn about the 7 dials, the things we can dial up or down when it comes to proclaiming God's word. Coming toward an end here, all forms of theater have one thing in common, the need for an audience. The audience completes the creative process. Why do actors do what they do? For the audience and the theater goers, right? The movie goers. Why do we do what we do at Mass? For those who come to Mass. No author or director wants a private performance. Our view of our work changes when we're surrounded by people. We must concern ourselves with our relationship with our audience, capture their interest, make them active, evoke in them an undeniable thirst and hunger. He wrote this about theater, but it could be applied to the masses equally. Letter C, study your audience and its reactions. This is such a great idea. You know, if we, as clergy, just one Sunday, instead of being so focused on what we're doing, we just like sit in the pew and watch other people. Are they engaged? Are they looking at their watches? Are they daydreaming? Right? Study your audience, study their reactions. Letter D, again, he's talking about theater, but it could be said of the church. We can learn from young people. They're alienated by what is bad in theater. They don't go to the theater because of what they hate about the theater. If we were to study that, well, what drives them away? Because if we would improve that, we would get them back. What about the church? Why are young people not coming to the church in the same way that older generations are coming to the church? If we were to focus on that, we'd probably be able to bring them back. The theater must be more than an oasis in people's lives. The church must be more than an oasis. Make audience members go out the door wanting to come back for more. Amen for church too. This is interesting. Number 21 deals with what it is that people remember. I think about this deeply because that's why I like to preach with visuals, because there are visual people who are not going to remember a word that I said. I'd like to talk about Father Alfred was my childhood pastor. I don't remember a single homily in all those years of being a child. Talk about wasted time. I don't remember a single homily. So the question that I have as priest and pastor is, how do we help people to remember? Number 21, the theater is about joy, catharsis, celebration, exploration, shared meaning. But once it's over, it can't be recaptured slavishly by imitation. We must avoid deadly theater and begin the search anew. The fun and powerful emotion of a performance will be forgotten. We must help the audience to see itself more clearly and to remember the silhouette of the essence of what the performance had to say. Years later, when we think of any theatrical experience, we'll only be left with a kernel engraved on our memory. Think back to what I said during the 4 Masses of August of last year. Do you remember them? Neither do I. Follow me? It's sort of like, you know, what is going to be left in the kernel of our memory, because that from that kernel we construct a set of meanings, and only then does theater serve its purpose. If people go away with a kernel of a memory of something from that performance or that mass, then it will have served a purpose. Brook ends with a formula, he calls it, or an equation for bringing an event to life. He says theater equals repetition times representation times assistance or assistance. Repetition is the grinding practice of the mechanical, but through grinding practice of the mechanical, we create the perfect, right? Practice makes perfect. He says all clowns, acrobats, and dancers know that practice makes perfect. Or what I would say, perfect practice makes perfect. If you're just repeating the wrong thing over and over, you're going to have the wrong thing in the end. He talks about how it was that Laurence Olivier, a name that may be familiar to some of us, repeated lines to the point of absolute obedience, thus allowing him freedom. Right? He memorized and practiced those lines until they were part of him. I think about that at Mass. Sometimes when we hear a responsorial psalm or a reading proclaimed, it's like those words aren't coming from the person. That person's just reading them on paper. Representation, which is, in this case, the French word for performance, something from the past is shown again, not in imitation or as a description of a past event, but as living it again in its immediacy. And at Mass, what is the greatest representation we have? The Eucharist. We don't live the Eucharist as something from the past. We're not imitating the past. Instead, we're doing it here today, sharing bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ. We make something present. the body of Christ. We renew the life that repetition denies. Repetition leads to deadly theater. Instead, representation leads to this life-giving, bringing things to life. And finally, assistance, the French word for audience. The actor enters a process that can turn lifeless at any moment, but the director assists and the audience assists with its interest in watching role. In the liturgy, all of us are working together, which is why we call it liturgy. It comes from a Greek word which means work. We're all working together, assisting one another in this thing that we call liturgy. And one of the last lines in his book is, in theater, the slate is wiped clean all the time. In Mass, wouldn't it be cool if we could say kind of the same? Because we keep repeating the same Mass. Did you notice that? Mass doesn't change. Every Sunday, it's the same structure. How do we keep it from becoming a deadly Mass? How do we keep it alive? Thoughts or reflections as we prepare to host Father Kevin, a playwright and theater director to Holy Family next Wednesday?
Is he gonna eat us up and spit us out?
Is he going to eat us up and spit us out? If he's watching this video, well, I guess we'll have to leave that to him. I have a feeling that one of the reasons that I'm personally inviting him, we haven't done a lot with proclaimers of the word and or other ministries in a long, long time. So I feel sort of negligent in my role as director. You know what I mean? So to invite in a guest director for a few performances, I hate to use words like that, but from the world of theater, to invite in other eyes to be able to help us to see things that maybe we don't see in ourselves, help us improve. I think it'd be fun. It won't be fun for me personally, let's be honest, because he's going to point out things to me that'll be like, oh. Right?
Be helpful with some alcohol.
But let's see what becomes of it. Other thoughts, insights?
I can relate a lot of these things to dancing.
Especially in your role, I'm imagining as one who directs.
Especially that line that said, "Are you correct?" Because I have a student who thinks she's wonderful and that she doesn't have to listen to me and that she can teach.
Yep.
She can teach the other next to her, and who comes to class to talk, not to learn and to pay attention and learn how to dance, but to chat and to pretend to be the teacher, and instead of allowing the other person to ask me, know that she's trying to teach. And so I have to be very careful how to correct that.
As director, because you're working with other human beings here, right? You could just say to her, if you want to be like that, why don't you go form your own dance group?
Yeah.
Instead, she's part of the group. So how do you help her? How do you help her to increase her skills? And how, because every actor has an influence on every other, influence the other actors. So it sort of becomes this delicate dance of director and actors and text, or in this case, dance, right?
And also who don't accept that it's not performing right. The steps are not
criticism
there. But she doesn't. She thinks she's great, that she knows everything, that she can teach. And it's not true.
Yeah. In the event that she's watching the video, we're actually talking about a guy. We're disguising the identity of that person. But it's this delicate thing, when you're working with people, how do you work with them? And that's what I appreciate about Brook, is because I hadn't thought about this. Musicians just work with instruments, and that instrument doesn't change. In theater, we're not working with instruments. We're working with human beings who are going to make mistakes, and hopefully who are going to learn and grow, and who are not going to get into a rut, but sometimes do get into a rut and create deadly theater, or in our case, deadly masses. Yikes. Let's avoid deadly masses here at Holy Family. Mario?
I was, my wife and I were always looking for a very intelligent person like you. And you do like details.
Have an eye for detail.
You do. And people have to, you're the director.
There you go.
You're the director of this church, and you want for them, for the audience to know, and because you can sing well, you can play the piano, you can play the organ.
And I can improve in all those things too.
You,
Yeah.
You're a very director. I mean, what else can
I have a feeling we're
say?
cultivating that sense in others as well, because I have a feeling that as all of us, as we grow in our experience, all of us start developing an eye and an ear and a sense as well about this. That's probably the perfect note to end on. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and forever shall be, a world without end.